The sun was sinking over Dust Creek, turning the town square the color of dried blood. Amy Woodward knew this was the moment everything finally broke, not because she had failed, but because the town had decided she no longer belonged. A small hand tugged at her torn sleeve. "Mama," her daughter whispered, voice trembling, "did we do something wrong?" Amy dropped to her knees in the dirt, pulling all 6 children into her arms as the murmurs grew louder. Men she had shared meals with stared at their boots. Women who once borrowed sugar from her kitchen turned their faces away. The man in the fine suit kept pointing at her children, at her torn dress, at the space she occupied, his voice pitched to carry, ensuring every word landed like a public branding. "Look at them!" Silas Thorne's voice cut through the square like a whip crack. His tailored jacket didn't have a speck of dust on it, his silver watch chain gleaming in the dying light. 6 children, 6 mouths bleeding this town dry while honest men break their backs in my mines. Amy tasted copper and grit. 3-year-old Samuel buried his face in her shoulder, sobbing. 10-year-old Michael stood rigid, fists clenched, trying to be the man his father had been. The twins, Emma and Ellie, both 5, clutched each other with identical tear-streaked faces. 7-year-old James pressed against her back, silent and watchful, and Clara, 8 years old, with her father's steady gaze and a spine that refused to bend, stood slightly apart, chin lifted. "Leeches," Thorne continued, circling them like a predator. "Parasites on the good people of Dust Creek." He pulled a folded document from his pocket and held it up. "The company has investigated the collapse, worker negligence, Thomas Woodward's recklessness. No pension, no death benefits, no compensation. The lie hung in the air like smoke. And the company housing? Forfeited. You have until sunrise to vacate Dust Creek territory." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. "What about the children, Mr. Thorne?" The sheriff's voice came from the edge of the crowd, uncertain. Thorne's smile widened. "The county has work programs. Strong boys for the lumber camps. Girls for domestic service. It's the most charitable solution." Amy's vision blurred. He was going to take them, separate them, send them to labor camps where siblings were scattered across the territory and never found each other again. "Please," her voice cracked, "I'll work. I'll do anything. Just let me keep my children." "Mama, don't beg him." Clara stepped forward, placing herself between her mother and Thorne. "Please, sir, we don't eat much. We can work, all of us. I can cook and clean. Michael can chop wood." Thorne's laugh cut through her words. Cold, amused, cruel. "Work? Look at you, child. You're barely fit for the orphanage, let alone honest labor." He turned to the sheriff. "Marshal, I want these children processed by morning, 6 wards of the state. The mother can go wherever charity cases go when charity runs out." The sheriff shifted his weight, hand on his gun belt, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to defy the man who owned half the territory. This was it, the end of everything. Then the murmuring stopped, not because the crowd had found mercy, but because someone at the far edge of the boardwalk wasn't participating. A man in worn leather and a dark hat stood apart, leaning against a post with deliberate stillness. His face was shadowed, but his eyes were fixed on the children with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. The whispers started. "That's Sheppard, the ghost of the gulch. He won't interfere, he never does." But Charlie Sheppard didn't look away. His shadow stretched long across the square, pointing directly at Amy and her children, like an arrow drawn in fading light. Thorne followed the crowd's gaze, irritation flickering across his face. "Something you want to say, Sheppard, or are you just here for the entertainment?" Silence. Then the creak of wood, slow, deliberate. Charlie Sheppard pushed off the post and stepped down from the boardwalk. His boots struck the packed earth with quiet authority. He crossed the square in absolute silence, the crowd parting to let him through. He stopped 10 feet from Thorne. hat still low. The entire square held its breath. That's far enough. The silence stretched like a drawn blade. Silas Thorne straightened his jacket, his jaw tightening as Charlie Sheppard stood motionless between him and the Woodward family. The cowboy's hat still hung low, but there was something in his stance, something immovable, that made the crowd take an instinctive step back. "Sheppard?" Thorne's voice had lost its theatrical edge, replaced by something colder. "This doesn't concern you." "Didn't say it did." "Then step aside." Charlie didn't move, didn't even shift his weight. His eyes, barely visible beneath the brim of his hat, remained fixed on Thorne with the patience of a man who'd waited out longer standoffs than this. Thorne's face flushed. "You want this burden? A destitute woman with 6 children who can't feed themselves? Is that what you're offering?" The question hung in the air like a noose waiting to drop. Amy held her breath. This was the moment every man before had walked away. The moment kindness revealed itself as pity, and pity as performance. She tightened her arms around her children, preparing for the inevitable. But Charlie's voice, when it came, was quiet and deliberate. "A big house is a tomb when it's empty." The crowd exhaled collectively. Whispers rippled through the square like wind through dead leaves. "He can't be serious. Against Thorne? He'll get himself killed." Thorne's smile was thin and venomous. "You're making a mistake, Sheppard. These people are nothing. They have nothing. And interfering with county business ain't county business." Charlie's hand didn't move toward his gun, but the threat was there, implicit in the stillness. It's a man bullying a widow and her children in front of witnesses, too scared to stop him. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably, his hand dropping away from his belt, not out of conscience, but out of calculation. Everyone in Dust Creek knew Charlie Sheppard's reputation, the ghost of the gulch, the man who'd walked away from 3 range wars with nothing but scars and silence. The sheriff wasn't getting paid enough to test those rumors. "Sheriff," Thorne snapped, "arrest this man." "For what?" Charlie's voice was still quiet. "Standing in a public square?" The sheriff looked between them, then cleared his throat. "Maybe we let this cool down, Mr. Thorne. Handle the paperwork in the morning." Thorne's face went white with fury, but he was too smart to push further. Not here, not now. He adjusted his watch chain with a sharp, precise movement. "This isn't over, Sheppard." "Didn't figure it was." Charlie turned, finally, and looked down at Amy. His face was weathered, scarred along the left jaw, but his eyes, dark and steady, held something she didn't expect. Not pity, recognition. "Get your children. We're leaving." Amy's hands trembled as she stood, pulling Samuel into her arms. Michael took Emma's hand. Clara grabbed Ellie and James. They moved as a unit, tight and terrified, expecting every second for this stranger to change his mind. The crowd parted silently as Charlie led them through the square and toward the edge of town where a horse and wagon waited. He lifted the younger children into the bed without a word, then offered Amy his hand. She took it, hating how much she needed it. The ride out of Dust Creek was silent except for the creak of wheels and the children's muffled sobs. Amy kept glancing at Charlie's profile, waiting for the excuse, the conditions, the moment he'd realize what he'd taken on and turn the wagon around. But he kept driving. The sun had nearly set when the wagon crested a low rise, and Amy saw it. Sheppard's Rise, a stone and timber homestead built like a fortress, high walls, watchtowers at the corners, a single gate. It sat alone against the darkening sky, isolated and deliberate. Charlie pulled the wagon to a stop. "This is home," he said quietly. "For now." For now, Amy thought, her chest tightening, because kindness always had a limit, and she'd already learned how quickly for now became not anymore. The gate creaked open, revealing a homestead built for siege, not comfort. Amy took in the details as Charlie drove the wagon through. Stone walls thick enough to stop bullets, wooden watchtowers at each corner with clear sightlines across the valley, rifle slots carved into the upper floor shutters. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress designed by someone who expected the world to come for him eventually. Charlie helped the children down without a word, then turned to face Amy and her brood gathered in the dusty courtyard. 3 rules, he said, his voice flat and businesslike. 1, nobody wanders beyond the gate without me knowing. 2, you don't ask about my past and I won't ask about yours. 3, this is temporary. Soon as you get your feet under you, you find somewhere else. Amy's jaw tightened. Temporary. There it was. The condition she'd been waiting for. Understood, she said quietly. But while we're here, we earn our keep. I can cook, mend, clean. The children can help too. Ain't asking you to earn anything. I'm not asking for permission. Their eyes met. Something flickered in Charlie's expression. Not annoyance, but something closer to surprise. He nodded once, then turned toward the house. Main floor's yours. I'll take the loft. Water pumps by the barn. Cellars stocked. He disappeared inside, leaving them standing in the fading light. Michael was the first to move, his hand instinctively going to the axe, leaning against the woodpile. Clara pulled the twins close, scanning the walls and shadows with wary intelligence. James stayed pressed against Amy's side, silent as always. Only Samuel, exhausted from crying, had fallen asleep in her arms. Amy carried him inside. The main room was sparse. Table, chairs, a stone fireplace that looked like it hadn't been used for warmth in years. Everything was functional, clean, and utterly impersonal. No photographs, no decorations, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived here. She laid Samuel on the single bed in the corner, then turned to find Clara already exploring the kitchen, Emma and Ellie hovering nervously by the door, Michael testing the sturdiness of the floorboards, and James standing perfectly still, watching everything. We'll make this work, Amy whispered more to herself than to them. By nightfall, she'd found flour and salt pork in the cellar and made a simple stew. The children ate slowly, carefully, as if afraid the food might vanish if they acknowledged it too loudly. When their bowls were empty, truly empty for the first time in months, Clara began washing dishes without being asked. Michael checked the door locks. The twins curled together on the floor near the fireplace. Amy tucked them in one by one, salvaging blankets from a trunk that smelled of cedar and disuse. She watched their faces relax into sleep, bellies full, bodies warm, and felt something break open inside her chest. She turned away before they could see her cry. Silent tears ran down her face as she gripped the edge of the table, shoulders shaking with the grief and relief she'd been holding back since Thomas died, since the mine, since Thorne's accusations, since the moment she realized she'd lost everything except the 6 fragile lives clinging to her. Outside, Charlie sat on the watchtower platform, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the dark horizon, but he wasn't watching for threats. He was listening. Inside the house, he could hear them breathing, all 7 of them, the soft, steady rhythm of sleep, the sound of people who felt safe enough to let their guard down. It had been 15 years since Sheppard's rise had held that sound, and despite every wall he'd built, every rule he'd laid down, every reminder that this was temporary, Charlie Sheppard felt something shift in the silence. A memory he'd buried long ago began to surface. A workhouse dormitory, a younger version of himself, and the last time he'd heard children breathing in the dark before they were taken away. Charlie didn't sleep that night. He never did, not really. Sleep meant dropping your guard, and the world had taught him long ago what happened when you let yourself be vulnerable. He was 12 when they took him to the workhouse, 11 when his parents died, 10 when he last saw his sister's face. The memories came in fragments sharp as broken glass. A cramped wagon, a woman in gray separating him from his siblings at the orphanage door. Boys this way, girls that way. His brother's hand slipping from his sister's scream cutting off behind a slammed door, and the promise he'd made, "I'll find you," that he'd never kept. The workhouse had been brutality disguised as charity. 14-hour days, beatings for slowness, starvation rations. By the time he was 16, Charlie had learned that survival meant becoming something harder than whatever tried to break you. He'd escaped at 17, never found his siblings, spent 15 years running from the fact that he'd failed them, until yesterday, when he'd seen 6 children clinging to their mother in the dust, and something he'd thought was dead woke up screaming inside him. Morning came with the smell of coffee. Charlie descended from the loft to find Amy already at the stove, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled up despite the chill. The children were stirring, Michael carrying water, Clara organizing the younger ones for washing up. "Didn't have to do that," Charlie said. "I know." Amy poured him coffee without looking up. "But idle hands make for restless minds, and mine's been restless for 3 months." He took the cup. "Since the mine?" She nodded, her hands stilling on the counter. "Thomas went down that shaft every day for 8 years, never once complained. Then one morning," her voice cracked slightly, "they wouldn't even let me see his body, said it was too dangerous to retrieve them. All 12 men just left down there. Thorne's mine? Thorne's mine." She wiped her eyes quickly, aware of Clara watching from across the room. "Before he died, Thomas gave Samuel this carved wooden horse, said to keep it safe. I thought it was just something to remember him by." Charlie's instincts prickled. "Can I see it?" Amy retrieved it from her bag, a small, crude carving, hollow-sounding when Charlie tapped it. His fingers found a seam along the base. Deliberate. Hidden. He said nothing, just handed it back and filed the information away. By afternoon, he had the children in the yard. "Not teaching you to fight," he told them, noting Michael's defensive stance. "Teaching you to think. Someone comes at you, you don't stand your ground like your pa would have wanted. You run, you hide, you survive. Understand?" Michael's jaw clenched, but he nodded. Charlie showed them the sightlines from the watchtowers, the cellar entrance hidden beneath the barn floor, how to bar the doors from inside, how to move quietly, how to read the horizon for dust clouds. Not soldiers, survivors. Clara absorbed everything with frightening intelligence. The twins turned it into a game. James watched silently, memorizing. Samuel clung to Amy's skirts, too young to understand but old enough to sense the seriousness. As the sun set, Charlie stood at the gate watching them, Michael practicing the door bar, Clara testing the cellar hatch, Amy supervising with fierce protectiveness. This was supposed to be temporary, but as he watched Samuel laugh for the first time in days, watched Michael's shoulders straighten with purpose, watched Amy finally breathe without fear shadowing every exhale, Charlie understood with cold certainty that he wasn't going to let them go. He'd failed to protect his siblings 15 years ago. He wouldn't fail these children, even if it meant standing between them and every threat that came, including Silas Thorne. Amy found Charlie in the barn 3 days later, oiling his rifle with methodical precision. She'd been working up the courage all morning, watching him teach Michael how to properly stack firewood, showing the twins which plants near the creek were safe to touch. He wasn't what she'd expected, wasn't cruel or demanding, wasn't using them, and that terrified her more than anything because it meant she might actually trust him, and trust required honesty. "The wooden horse isn't just a keepsake," she said quietly. Charlie's hand stilled on the gun. He didn't look up. Figured. "Thomas didn't die because of worker negligence." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "He died because Silas Thorne ignored every safety protocol to save money. Thomas knew. He kept records, dates, incidents, warnings that were filed and buried. He hid them inside the children's toys before the final shift." Now Charlie looked up. "How many toys?" 3. the wooden horse Samuel carries, a tin soldier Michael has, a doll Clara keeps. And Thorne knows? I don't think so, not yet. Amy swallowed hard. But he will. The mine foreman, Patterson, he saw Thomas carving them the week before the collapse. If he connects the pieces… Charlie stood slowly, the rifle forgotten. Show me. 10 minutes later, the wooden horse lay open on Charlie's workbench, its hollowed interior revealing a tightly rolled set of papers. Charlie spread them out carefully, his jaw tightening with each page. Dates, names, 12 documented safety violations, foreman reports marked rejected, cost prohibitive, a pattern of collapses in other Thorne-owned mines, each one blamed on worker error, each one quietly settled with widows who had no power to fight back. This would destroy him, Charlie said softly. This would hang him, Amy corrected, if we could get it to a federal marshal. But we can't, because the moment we try to leave, he'll know. They stood in silence, the weight of the evidence sitting between them like an unexploded shell. 50 miles away in Dust Creek, Silas Thorne sat in his office above the mining company headquarters, listening to his foreman with growing unease. You're certain? Thorne's voice was ice. Patterson shifted his weight. Woodward was carving something the week before the collapse. Hollow toys. I didn't think nothing of it then, but after you mentioned wanting the widow gone. He trailed off, letting Thorne fill in the blanks. Thorne's fingers drummed once on his desk. The children still have their belongings? Far as I know. Then we retrieve them, quietly. I want those toys found and burned. And if the widow or that fool Cowboy interfere… Thorne opened his desk drawer, revealing a stack of cash and a wanted poster for a known mercenary. We handle it permanently. Patterson paled slightly but nodded. Go tonight, Thorne said, and Patterson, don't come back empty-handed. Back at Sheppard's Rise, Charlie was pacing the length of the barn, his mind calculating angles and odds. Amy watched him, recognizing the look of a man preparing for war. They'll come for the evidence, he said finally. And when they do, you and the children will be exposed. Thorne can claim you're trespassing, harboring stolen property, anything he wants. You've got no legal protection. I know. Charlie stopped pacing, turned to face her directly. Then marry me. Amy's breath caught. Not, Charlie raised a hand. Not like that. A paper marriage, legal protection. You become Mrs. Sheppard, the children become mine by law, and Thorne can't touch you without going through me. It's strategy, nothing more. We draw up terms. You run the house, I guard the perimeter. Fair trade. Amy stared at him, searching his face for deception and finding only grim practicality. You'd do that? Risk everything for evidence against a man you barely know? I'm not doing it for the evidence, Charlie said quietly. I'm doing it because those 6 children deserve better than being erased because their father told the truth. Outside, the sun was setting, and somewhere on the road from Dust Creek, riders were already moving through the darkness. The horses came at midnight. Charlie saw them first, 6 riders silhouetted against the moonlit ridge, moving with the careful deliberation of men who killed for money. He was down from the watchtower in seconds, rifle in hand. Amy! His voice was sharp but controlled. Get the children to the cellar. Now. She didn't question, didn't hesitate. Within minutes, all 6 children were herded down the hidden hatch beneath the barn floor. Clara held Samuel, keeping him quiet. Michael gripped the tin soldier tight enough to leave marks. The twins clung to each other in the darkness. Stay down, Amy whispered. No matter what you hear, understand? 6 terrified nods. She closed the hatch and returned to the house to find Charlie barricading windows, checking ammunition, his face carved from stone. How many? 6. Maybe more hanging back. He handed her a revolver. You know how to use this. Thomas taught me. Good. They'll try the front gate first. When they realize it's reinforced, they'll split. 2 around back, 4 on the main approach. Tripwires are set on the east side, oil slick on the west. Amy's hands were shaking, but she checked the cylinder anyway. 6 rounds. What do they want? The toys, the evidence, us dead. Charlie moved to the window. In that order. The first shot shattered the silence at 12:47. It punched through the front shutter, embedding in the far wall 6 inches from Amy's head. She dropped instinctively, heart hammering. Stay low. Charlie returned fire, 2 precise shots that sent the riders scattering for cover. They're testing our response, seeing if we're armed. Another volley. Glass exploded, wood splintered, then the scream. One of the mercenaries had hit the tripwire on the east approach. The sound of a man falling, cursing, told them the traps were working, but it wouldn't be enough. They're flanking, Charlie shouted, moving toward the back window. He fired 3 times, each shot calculated, and Amy heard a body hit the ground. But there were too many. A torch arced through the broken window, landing on the wooden floor. Flames caught immediately, spreading toward the curtains. The barn! Amy grabbed a bucket, desperately trying to contain the fire, but more torches followed. The west wall was burning now, smoke filling the main room. Charlie shot again, then gasped, a sharp, pained sound that stopped Amy's heart. He staggered back from the window, blood spreading across his left shoulder. Charlie! I'm fine, keep shooting! But he wasn't fine. His rifle arm was compromised. The mercenaries knew it too. They advanced, emboldened. Amy raised the revolver with both hands and fired. Once, twice, 3 times, each shot wild with fear and fury. One found its mark, a man clutching his leg, falling. From below she heard Clara's voice, "Mama, the cellar door!" 2 mercenaries were trying to force the barn entrance. Amy ran, Charlie stumbling behind her, his good hand still gripping his rifle. She reached the barn as the door splintered, raised the revolver, fired her last 3 rounds point blank. Both men went down. Behind her, Charlie collapsed against the wall, breathing hard, blood soaking through his shirt. The children, they are safe. Amy's voice was steel. Michael, the oil lamp. From inside the cellar, Michael's small hand pushed up a lit lamp. Amy grabbed it and hurled it at the barn entrance. The oil Charlie had spread earlier ignited in a wall of flame. The mercenaries fell back, shouting, regrouping. 2 were dead, 1 wounded, the others retreating toward their horses, the firelight making them easy targets. Charlie managed 1 final shot from his position on the ground. Another rider fell, then silence, hoofbeats fading, the crackle of flames consuming the barn's west wall. Amy dropped to her knees beside Charlie, pressing cloth against his wound. "You're not dying on me." Wasn't planning to. His voice was weak but defiant. "They'll be back." "I know." Above them, half the barn was burning. The house was damaged. Their defenses were compromised, but they were alive. And somewhere in the darkness, Silas Thorne's mercenaries were reporting back that the widow and the cowboy were a lot harder to kill than expected. Charlie's blood soaked through the 3rd bandage in as many minutes. "Stay with me." Amy's hands were steady now, fear burned away by necessity. She'd pulled him into the main house after the mercenaries retreated, the children huddled in the corner watching with wide, terrified eyes. "Charlie, look at me." His eyes were unfocused, skin pale as old paper. The bullet had gone through his shoulder, missing bone but tearing muscle. He was losing too much blood. "Amy," his voice was barely a whisper, "if I don't make it." "You're making it." She pressed harder on the wound, her other hand steadying his face. "You don't get to save us just to die in your own house. You hear me? You stay." Something in her voice cut through the fog. Charlie's eyes sharpened slightly. He nodded once. Clara appeared at Amy's elbow with clean water and torn sheets, already thinking 3 steps ahead. "What else do you need, Mama?" "Whiskey, for cleaning the wound." Amy didn't look away from Charlie's face. "Michael, check the perimeter. James, bar the doors. Emma, Ellie, take Samuel to the back room and keep him calm." They moved like soldiers, like survivors. By dawn, Charlie's fever had broken, but he was too weak to stand. Amy had stitched the wound with needle and thread from her sewing kit, her hands remembering skills her grandmother had taught her decades ago. He slept fitfully, but he slept. And Amy took his rifle to the watchtower. The sun rose red over the scorched remains of the barn. Amy sat with her back against the tower post, the rifle across her lap, watching the horizon for dust clouds. Her hands ached, her eyes burned from smoke and sleeplessness, but she didn't move. Below, she heard Clara organizing the younger ones, dividing the remaining food, rationing water, checking the traps Charlie had taught them about. When had her 8-year-old daughter become a quartermaster? Michael climbed up to the tower mid-morning, his face smudged with soot. He awake yet? No, but he's breathing steady. Amy glanced at her son. You did good last night. Wasn't enough. They'll come back. I know. Michael was quiet for a long moment. Then, what do we do? Amy looked out at the road leading back to Dust Creek. 50 miles of exposed territory. No allies, no law that would help them. Just a wounded cowboy, a widow, and 6 children against a man who owned half of Nevada. The smart choice was to run, hide, disappear into the territories and hope Thorne forgot about them. But Thomas had died trying to hide the truth, and Amy was done letting powerful men bury the people they destroyed. We go back, she said quietly. Michael's eyes widened. To town? To town. Amy stood, rifle in hand, decision made. We take the evidence straight to the people, make it public, force Thorne to answer for what he did in front of everyone who turned their backs on us. He'll kill us. He's trying to kill us here. Amy looked down at her son, at the man he was becoming in the crucible of survival. At least in town, he'll have to do it where everyone can see. And maybe, just maybe, that'll be enough to make someone finally stand up. By noon, Charlie was awake enough to argue. You're insane, he rasped from the bed. You'll never make it past his men. Then come with us. Amy was already packing, the wooden horse, the tin soldier, the doll, all 3 pieces of evidence wrapped carefully. Or stay here and heal. But we're going. Charlie tried to sit up and failed, his face going gray with pain. Amy, you asked me to marry you for legal protection. She turned to face him, and he saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before, something forged in fire and blood. Well, I'm accepting, but not because I need protection, because those children deserve a mother who fights back, and a father who taught them they were worth protecting. She knelt beside the bed, took his hand. So heal fast, Charlie Sheppard, because when you catch up to us in Dust Creek, we're finishing this, together. They left at dawn the next morning. Amy drove the wagon. Michael rode shotgun, literally, Charlie's rifle across his lap. The 6 children and 3 toys that could destroy Silas Thorne headed east toward the rising sun. Behind them, Sheppard's Rise stood silent and scorched. Ahead, Dust Creek waited, and somewhere between the two, the final reckoning was already in motion. The wagon rolled into Dust Creek at high noon, and the town square fell silent. Amy Woodward sat straight-backed on the driver's seat, rifle across her lap, 6 children arranged behind her like a declaration of war. Her dress was torn and smoke-stained. Her hands were bandaged, but her eyes were clear and unflinching as she brought the wagon to a stop, in the exact spot where she'd knelt in the dust 2 weeks earlier. The crowd gathered slowly, curious, wary, guilty. Silas Thorne emerged from his office, his face darkening when he saw them. Mrs. Woodward, I thought we'd settled your situation. We did. Amy climbed down from the wagon, Clara and Michael flanking her immediately. You tried to kill us. We survived. Now we're here to settle yours. The murmur rippled through the square. Thorne's jaw tightened. Careful with your accusations, woman. Slander is a crime. So is murder. Amy's voice carried across the square, loud and clear. Thomas Woodward didn't die because of worker negligence. He died because you sent 12 men into a shaft you knew was unsafe. He died because you buried 17 safety violations to save money. He died because you valued profit over human life. Lies. Thorne's voice was smooth, practiced. Grief-stricken fantasies from a desperate widow. Then explain these. Amy pulled the documents from her coat, pages from the wooden horse, the tin soldier, the doll, now assembled into a complete record of Thorne's negligence. She held them high enough for everyone to see. Dates, names, foreman reports you rejected, 12 men dead because you chose not to spend $200 on support beams. Her voice cracked but didn't break. My husband documented everything, and you've spent 2 weeks trying to murder me and my children to keep it buried. The crowd shifted, uncomfortable. The women who'd turned away now couldn't look anywhere else. Thorne's hand moved toward his coat. Sheriff, arrest this woman for what? The voice came from the edge of the square. Charlie Sheppard stepped into view, his left arm in a sling but his gun hand free. He was pale, clearly in pain, but moving with lethal purpose. For telling the truth, for surviving the men you sent to kill her? The crowd gasped. Whispers exploded. You're wounded, Sheppard, Thorne said coldly. Should be resting. Should be dead, according to your mercenaries. Charlie moved to stand beside Amy. But funny thing about trying to kill families, sometimes they fight back. Thorne's composure cracked. His hand dove inside his coat, pulling a derringer. The crowd screamed. Charlie was faster. His shot hit Thorne's wrist before the derringer cleared his coat. The small gun clattered to the dirt, and Thorne dropped to his knees, clutching his shattered hand, blood streaming between his fingers. Sheriff? Charlie's voice was ice. You going to do your job now, or do I need to handle this too? The sheriff stood frozen, caught between power and justice. Then he looked at the crowd, at the faces of men who'd lost brothers and friends in Thorne's mines, at the women whose husbands never came home, at the children who grew up without fathers. He moved forward slowly and drew his handcuffs. Silas Thorne, you're under arrest for criminal negligence, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted murder. Thorne's scream was incoherent with rage as the cuffs snapped shut. Amy stood in the center of the square, the evidence still clutched in her hand. Her children gathered around her, the same spot where she'd knelt in shame, the same crowd that had turned away. But this time, she was standing. Charlie stepped closer, his voice low enough only she could hear. You did it. We did it. She looked up at him, exhausted and fierce. Together. The town watched in absolute silence as the man who'd ruled them for a decade was led away in chains. And in that silence, something shifted. The butcher stepped forward first, removing his hat. Mrs. Woodward, I apologize. Then the baker's wife. Then the blacksmith. One by one they came, not with pity, but with shame and respect. Amy accepted each apology with quiet dignity, but she didn't forget who'd stood beside her when it mattered. She turned to Charlie, 6 children between them, and extended her hand. I believe you proposed something, she said softly, about a partnership. Charlie took her hand, and for the first time in 15 years, let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he'd finally found what he'd been running from. A family worth protecting, a reason to stay. 3 weeks later, the federal marshal arrived from Carson City. The documents Amy provided were enough to seize Thorne's mining operations across 3 territories. Criminal charges were filed, restitution ordered for 12 families. The Dust Creek mine was shut down pending a complete safety overhaul. Silas Thorne, once the most powerful man in Nevada, sat in a cell awaiting trial for negligent homicide and conspiracy to commit murder. And Amy Woodward stood in the office of Dust Creek's circuit judge, Charlie Sheppard, beside her, 6 children arranged in a semicircle around them. Are you both certain about this? Judge Morrison looked between them, over his spectacles. Marriage is a legal contract, yes, but it's also meant to be a union of... We're certain, Amy said firmly. Charlie nodded once. The judge studied them, this weathered gunslinger and determined widow, these 6 children who watched the adults with cautious hope. He'd heard the stories, the siege, the confrontation, the evidence that brought down a tycoon. He signed the certificate. By the power vested in me by the territory of Nevada, I pronounce you husband and wife. No one cheered. The children didn't rush forward. This wasn't that kind of ceremony. But Clara smiled. Michael straightened his shoulders. The twins squeezed each other's hands. James allowed himself a small, rare grin. And Samuel, too young to understand but old enough to feel safe, reached up and took Charlie's hand. Charlie looked down at the small fingers wrapped around his, and something he'd thought was broken forever quietly stitched itself back together. They returned to Sheppard's Rise at sunset. The barn had been rebuilt, not just by Charlie, but by men from town who showed up without being asked, carrying lumber and shame in equal measure. The house had been repaired, the watchtowers reinforced. But it was the garden that surprised Amy most. Someone, she suspected the baker's wife, had planted vegetables along the south wall. Practical, hopeful, a statement that this family would be here long enough to harvest. Charlie helped her down from the wagon, his shoulder still healing but strong enough now. The children scattered immediately, Michael to check the livestock, Clara to the kitchen, the younger ones to the creek they'd learned was safe. Amy and Charlie stood alone in the courtyard as the sun painted everything gold and red. "You know this isn't what I planned," Charlie said quietly. "Taking in a family, getting married, any of it. I know. I'm not good at this." He gestured vaguely. "Being someone people depend on." "You've been doing it for 3 weeks already." Amy looked up at him, this man who'd stepped forward when everyone else stepped back. And those children. "They don't need you to be perfect, Charlie. They need you to stay."